Mill Creek takes the fight to the man with Hundra, a sword-and-sandal potboiler that leaves no bra unburned. Somewhere in that ahistorical place out of time that passes for the Middle Ages in movies, a tribe made up of only women enjoys a nomadic life of sapphic contentment. To these females go not only the traditional tasks of cooking and cleaning, but also the less typical ones of hunting, fishing, and gathering. The camp's alpha, the statuesque Hundra, brings home the bacon along with her trusty pooch Beast, whom she frequently chastises for having a twig and berries.
I think fear would not run so deep in you were you not male.
For all her courage, Hundra is afraid of one thing: the amorous touch of a man, which, for purposes of procreation, is the only use these ladies have for the unfair sex. A man-hater to her core, Hundra is more than happy to delegate childbearing duties to her little sister, since
I prefer the feel of a horse between my legs to that of swine. And it pleasures me instead of pains me.
Alas, Hundra's forced to rethink her angry celibacy when Huns fall on and devastate her tribe while she's away on the hunt. Hopelessly outnumbered, she flees, not out of fear, but after good ground to make a stand, which, once found, lets her make quick work of her pursuers. Safe for the moment, she broods on the tragedy that's befallen her. Not only has she been robbed of her family and her people, the responsibility has now fallen on her as the last survivor to keep her people's name alive. She visits a blind elder who tells her what she already knows but is having difficulty accepting. To fulfill her destiny, she must accept the seed of a male, that species she so viscerally detests. Following some meandering encounters, including a dust-up with an inexplicably hostile little midget person, Hundra gives this so-called heterosexuality thing a go with a coarse barbarian she happens across. We at home could be forgiven for noticing the two actually have quite a bit in common. But Hundra's just not that into him, so she beats him silly and sets his mostly female captives free. Frustrated and confused, she makes it to the nearest city, where she hopes for a more suitable suitor. After all, here fellas to choose from abound. Of course, this is the problem the same way it's the solution, since the men here are by and large nearly as brutal as the barbarians were. Thus, Hundra's greeted by guards rounding up young peasant girls to serve as concubines for the local tyrant. In this way, we meet the movie's villain, a bastard child of Raoul Julia and Eddie Van Halen, who, along with his ambiguously gay sidekick, leer condescendingly at the peasants, talk at length about how much fun it is to give other people orders, and just generally do fuck all, because when you get right down to it, the town basically runs itself, you know? They get wind of Hundra and decide to add her to their stable of sex slaves, leading to yet another interminable fight scene. This one moves the story, at least. As she's pairing with the city guards, Hundra finally happens on her soulmate, who, amazingly, is not Ricardo Montalban.
I can see by your appearance, doors may not be normal to you. Are you all right?
It's here the movie really takes off, as Hundra woos handsome Patere, the healer, in a scene I'm man enough to admit choked me up a little.
Do not worry. I'm Patere, the healer. I want to see if you've broken anything in your form. Do you speak?
You were made with me like a child.
I did not see your head strike anything, and I'm sure mine is intact. Who are you?
The two entwine into a courtship, and Hundra meanwhile eludes the sleazy Napakan and plots to liberate his harem. To aid in this last, she enlists a double agent whom she trains to fight and to treasure freedom. Hundra fell out of a barrel of early 80s sword-and-sandal fantasies, but has little in common with its cousins beyond the surficial. It lacks the epic quality of higher-budget fare like Excalibur, sure, but it also has better production values than the cheaper species of medieval costume adventure. It also takes itself more seriously. In fact, Hundra's a movie with a mission, It's guided by a sensibility that feels gender injustice keenly. So that time and again, we identify with Hundra as she runs up against presumptuous, hostile, or downright violent men who simply can't be content to let her live her own life and constantly insist on trying to violate her, enslave her, or extract tributes from her that she's unwilling to pay. Throughout, Hundra's sense of right and wrong never errs. She calls out in plain language what everyone else has agreed to ignore by unspoken cultural decree. That women here are treated unfairly, often cruelly. Her fighting prowess spares her having to worry about chauvinism on her own account, but she can't vanquish the patriarchy single-handedly, so she fights it by openly naming it every chance she gets. Hundra also came within a couple of years either way of numerous other movies to make the daring claim that society might not be entirely fair to women. These other movies, though, occasionally confuse biological men with institutional patriarchy, or otherwise adopt a hectoring or preaching tone, seeking presumably to pin patriarchy's sins on the individual men and their audience. Hundra, on the other hand, has a matter-of-fact quality about it. Yes, the movie mostly chronicles incidents of fictionalized sexist injustice, but it rarely tries to manipulate the audience or guide their reaction. Instead, it has a dispassionate tone. This is partly due to Hundra's stoicism as a character. Ennio Morricone's top-flight musical score contributes as well, hewing as it does to a dogged martial feel rather than indulging in the euphora tragic sweeps more commonly heard in fantasy movie soundtracks. The net effect of this is to depoliticize Hundra's feminist complaint and at the same time make it seem more credible. The movie isn't trying to convince us this is the way things are, it's just telling us this is the way things are. Not everything in Hundra is as clever as this. In fact, its biggest failure is what ought to be its biggest success, its fight scenes, which are clumsily choreographed, overlong, and slathered in coma-inducing quantities of slow-mo. Indeed, they're scarcely action scenes at all, but instead seem more like excuses to showcase the music and fire off a few slapstick gags, more of which fail than work. Also, for all its consciousness about gender equality and human rights, many of Hundra's scenes, particularly the ones concerning the harem and their captors, feel coarse and exploitative. A coarse exploitation I will compound by repeating some of these scenes presently.
Who have never been touched, great warriors, but who this as he commands, so do you obey.
On the whole, though, Hundra's makers seemed reasonably adept. Not only did they knock it out of the park with the music, but the costumes, hair, makeup, and sets are all pretty good. Especially considering what the crew had to work with, in terms of money, as well as the problem of devising an aesthetic for a film that isn't set in any particular time. What's more, the story is engaging, the characters likable, and the movie overall eminently enjoyable, so long as you can soldier through the endless swordplay. You might not expect it of a low-budget medieval fantasy, and one with a moral to boot, but Hundra entertains while making you think of an old problem, gender inequity, in a brand new way.
With the other. You remain.